certainly the next steps would be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is our #1 priority, and certainly what we would like to see. We are in very close contacts with our South Korean allies about these conversations.
Now begin with a senior Russian official having accused the U.S. of violating a key arms treaty by selling an advanced missile system to Japan. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov said the fact that such military complexes could appear on the country's eastern borders creates a situation that the Kremlin cannot ignore in its military planning. Senior official said measures are against the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which bans the deployment of such systems on the ground. Ryabkov said that Washington is already deploying missile systems at its bases in Romania and Poland near Russia's western borders. Earlier this month, Japan formally decided to expand its ballistic missile system with U.S.-made ground-based Aegis radar stations and interceptors. Tokyo said the measure is in response to a growing threat from North Korean missiles. Political analyst Bill Jones says the U.S. changes the rules and violates its commitments as it pleases because it only worries about its own interests. Here he is.
The U.S. is more acquainted, more used to changing the rules as it goes along. And in this case, of course, they are probably in violation of the treaty, as the Russians have claimed. The stationing of the Aegis missiles allegedly to defend Japan from a possible North Korean threat has bothered both China and Russia, and both have protested this incursion because it undercuts both of their defense policies. But in the case of Russia, of course, given the whole Cold War and the attempt to bring down the missile threat by the two major nuclear powers, this is ruled by a treaty, which should be considered sacred. But it seems like when the U.S. finds it useful, it will cut corners or even violate these treaties on the alleged pretext of defending the United States against a threat, in this case, from North Korea.
Enhancing security and our ability to work together as a team.
Russia's foreign minister is accusing the US of destabilizing the world as he launched into a list of grievances against the Trump administration. Sergey Lavrov lambasted American foreign policy during his annual news conference in Moscow. Now, he did not actually mention Donald Trump by name, but he slammed the US president for his threats to North Korea and Iran. Lavrov's criticism comes, of course, as the US is expected to issue new sanctions against Russia pretty soon.
The U.S. and the whole so-called historical West is losing its dominance that it enjoyed for the past 5 centuries. New centers of economic, financial power and of political influence are emerging as the result of the natural march of history, as well as the necessity to adapt the international system in order to involve these new power centers in the process of equal dialogue. The United States, unfortunately, is resorting to illegitimate methods to try to stop the relative decline of their role in world politics.
Sergey Lavrov there. Well, let's go straight to Moscow. Matthew Chance is there. Hi, Matt. You were listening to those comments. What do you make of them?
Well, it was interesting to compare what Sergey Lavrov was saying and the tone of his comments from, a year ago when President Trump was inaugurated, when he was talking about the hope that he had of building, to paraphrase him, a better relationship with the United States. All that in the past 12 months appears to have been sort of jettisoned out of the window. And now this was a public berating by the Russian foreign minister of US policy. You're right to mention he didn't mention Donald Trump by name, but he did talk about how the United States had destabilized the global order. He criticized the US for its threats against North Korea and Iran. He said that the US had been provoking tensions on the Korean peninsula, and he warned of the catastrophic consequences of such recklessness. He also warned the United States not to pull out of the nuclear deal with Iran, not least because that may affect future agreements with countries like North Korea if a deal with North Korea is proposed. And so, yes, it was a very, very public criticism on the part of the Russian foreign minister against US policy. And again, Donald Trump wasn't mentioned by name, but of course it's the US president who's been tweeting incessantly about these two countries, Iran and North Korea, and angering them, and of course, making Russia feel very uncomfortable with the great power of the United States that it is currently dealing with.
But in many ways, when Mr. Lavrov talks about shifting centers of power, there was anger in the statement, but does it not also pose an opportunity for Moscow?
Well, they're always going on about shifting centres of power and a multipolar world, and in part it's wishful thinking, because as part of that multipolar world, they visualise Russia as being one of the many poles. The reality is still that the United States remains a ferocious power, and I think that's reflected in the fact that the Russian foreign minister spent so much of his press conference, which went on for nearly 2.5 hours today, speaking about the relationship between Russia and the United States. But look, it's a big turnaround from last year. There was full of hopes in Russia that the relationship with the United States under Donald Trump could be improved. That hasn't happened. In fact, as you mentioned, within the next few weeks, the United States is expected to ratchet up sanctions against Russia over the allegation of it meddling in the US presidential election in 2016, as that may further heighten tensions. Robin.
Fox News alert for you. The U.S. just agreed to sell millions of dollars worth of missiles to Japan as threats from North Korea intensify. Well, the Trump administration now said to be considering a targeted strike on the rogue regime. Now, Kelly Wright is live in our nation's capital. What exactly that means, it certainly sounds scary. Kelly?
Heather, good morning to you as well. Numerous published reports indicate the Trump administration is considering conducting a deterrent strike against North Korea in the event of the Hermit Kingdom conducting another missile launch. Now, what that means is there's an article in the Wall Street Journal reporting the Trump administration would use a so-called bloody nose strategy against the North if it conducted another missile launch. The U.S. response would involve conducting a targeted, limited military strike on a facility in North Korea. Army General retired Jack King says the action would be risky.
Any military strike against North Korean property itself, not necessarily a missile that's off the mainland, but anything on the mainland itself, North Korea has committed itself that they would look at that as an act of provocation of war. And as a result of that, they would unleash all of their capabilities on South Korea. These are complicated, difficult issues.
Reports of this strategy comes a day after talks between North and South Korea about next month's Winter Olympics. The North agreed to send athletes to compete in the Games. South Korea's President Moon says President Trump deserves big credit for bringing the first inter-Korean talks in 2 years by applying pressure on Kim. Moon now hopes to have a summit with Kim to resolve the nuclear standoff.
Certainly the next steps would be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is our #1 priority, and certainly what we would like to see. We are in very close contacts with our South Korean allies about these conversations.
And General King, getting back to him, he adds he believes tough UN sanctions are having some impact on the North as well. But he warns the U.S. must keep a very close eye on North Korea, which the president agrees with. And that's what he's doing and being tough with Kim Jong-un. The regime has used negotiations in the past to gain more time to advance its nuclear program. And that is something the United States will no longer tolerate.
All right. Certainly something we should all keep our eye on. Kelly Bright live for us. Thank you, Kelly.